Hi, I'm Jeff Schoep, and this is Beyond Barriers. I'm here with Jenn Kreis today, and we are going to be talking about all kinds of subjects and covering all kinds of different things. Just so the listeners or the viewers know a little bit about who we are, our experience, and where we came from, I'd like to start with Jenn. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yep. Hi, I'm Jenn. I am a former, in a way. I was raised in the movement. My father is August Kreis. He was once leader of Aryan Nations. Before that, he was involved in the Klan for a very long time. He is now serving prison time. He received 50 years for childhood sexual abuse that he had done to my younger siblings, my sisters.
All right. Thank you so much for being here tonight with us, Jenn, bringing your expertise to the program. You know, as Jenn said, she was raised in the movement. My story is, I was involved with the National Socialist Movement for 27 years, 25 of those years running the organization. We don't want to explain our stories for this whole episode because there's so much to discuss and there's so many different things to cover, but we will do more of a deep dive into our own histories in upcoming episodes, so we can certainly so the viewers can learn more about Jenn and myself as we move forward with this. So I want to talk about a few different things this evening. We talk about a little bit about Jenn's history. Jenn was not just raised in the movement, but, she was a survivor. All right. So both of us being former white nationalists and yourself being raised in the movement and myself, basically my entire adult life was involved in this. What we're doing now is we're countering violent extremism. We're getting out there, we're speaking about some of the things we can do to change things, build peace building bridges and trying to help in a lot of ways other people that have been involved in this life, in this lifestyle. I know since I left the movement in March of 2019, since then I've talked with countless people that are leaving the movement or in the process of leaving. So I think it's really important that the public understands that change is possible. And even for someone that was raised in the movement like Jenn, or someone that has spent 27 years in it like myself, we're both out of the movement now and we're trying to counter, working diligently to counter that message. So your thoughts on that, Jenn?
Yeah, people can definitely always change. I think a lot of people who are in the movement, they feel stuck because, that's really all even growing up, we didn't have, my father didn't have any people hanging around or anything that weren't in the movement. Every weekend, our house was full of skinheads and, if they weren't at our house, we were at another house, with everyone hanging around. Like every Sunday we had Bible study up at somebody's house that called himself a Christian identity minister. And all of that, I was the skinheads raised me for the most part. That's all I knew. So when you go to walk away from something like that, it's not just, okay, for instance, I'm not going to go to church on Sundays anymore. It's not like that. It's, it encompasses our whole lives. So,
no, it's a good point, and I'm glad you brought that up because there's a lot, I think, that the average person doesn't understand that is looking at these situations and things like that. I mean, we have, change is possible. It's a difficult thing for a lot of people, and sometimes it takes time too. It's not something that I've had a lot of people ask me since I've been out. They're like, well, what was the catalyst? What was the reason? And there's no, like, for most people, there's no one moment. It's like a whole plethora of different things that took place in the de-radicalization process. Quite often can take years, for different everybody handles it in a different way. But like you had said, there's people in your homes, all the people that were around your family, as I know as well. The people that I was around too, everybody's in the movement. So when you leave the movement, it's like, in a lot of ways, I believe it's like leaving a cult, and I used to not like that term, when people, different girls I dated and things like that, if they came around or they came to anything from with the movement, they'd say, Jeff, this is like a cult. And I'd get angry and I said, no, it's not. It's not like a cult. And I was like, why is one girl after another saying this? Why do they keep saying this thing? And I never really got it until after I got out and then started the de-radicalization process. I call it the decompression period for me, because I felt like my brain was decompressing as when you're getting out of it. And then it was like, oh, now I see, because everyone just about, your whole support network, everybody's involved in the movement. So that there's a lot for people to understand, that it's not easy for anybody, whether you were raised in it or whether you chose to be involved in it. It takes a lot.
Yeah, a lot of times when I was a teenager, I would hear people say, oh, that's just a gang. And I would defend that, no, we're absolutely not a gang. Yeah, it is a gang. It's a white gang. It absolutely is.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, that's another one of those terms that when we were there in the movement, if someone called it a cult or a gang or anything like that, we were like, nope, that's not it. It's not like that. But once you back away and you look at it from the outside looking in, it's very much so. It's both of those things, and it's something I think a lot of people don't see. So definitely good points. In tonight's episode, some of the things that we really wanted to touch on is right now here in America, the whole world's going crazy in a lot of ways. And some of the things I wanted to talk about is I think we can all agree. I think most of the viewing audience, most people in America in general, think, saw what happened with George Floyd in Minneapolis about a week ago, where an officer kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes until he was no longer able to breathe. And it was a horrific video and a horrific incident, and where a man lost his life. And then it came out that several other officers there was 4 officers total that participated in this tragedy. So we want to talk a little bit tonight about George Floyd. We're in solidarity with the peaceful protesters in calling for justice for George Floyd and his family. What happened to him was wrong. But so I think we're going to touch on those issues tonight. Did you have thoughts on that, Jen?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm, it upsets me very much what was done to that man. And, I have no issues whatsoever with people out protesting as long as it is peaceful, because more violence is not going to solve anything. It's just more violence is going to cause more violence, and it's just going to ricochet back and forth.
It really is a vicious circle. A lot of times when I think of the circle of violence, I think of it brings me to the nation of Afghanistan and the Taliban. It's just one example, but I use it quite often when we're discussing things like this, where with the Pashtun people in the Taliban, if your father, your uncle, some family member is bombed or taken out, it's the rest of the family's duty under their tribal customs, basically, to go after the people that did that took a life for a life. So it's like this endless cycle of violence and revenge, and there's no end to it. And I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I think we're seeing that here in America, where now like two wrongs don't make a right. You know, we all heard that growing up as kids, and here what happened to George Floyd was absolutely tragic, and it was horrifying to anybody that saw the video. And I think most Americans agree with that. But now the peaceful protesting, I think, is good, and I think it's important and all that. But some of what's happened since then with the riotings and the killings and things like that are not helping our nation. They're not helping our country to heal. And it seems like in some ways, and I don't want to be all negative about it, but I mean, there's a lot of good and positive things going on too. But it really bothers me, some of the videos and the footage of people dying and being violently and viciously assaulted for defending their stores or their friends and family, and some of the horrific things that we've seen in the last week.
Yeah, it's awful. It's awful. And I think that people sitting at home and watching from their windows, if they live in the cities or anything, it's taken away from the original message of the police brutality and, you know, this is wrong, and they can't be taking lives like that. No matter what the person may have done, it's not their place to take a life. And but I think that all the violence is going to it's going to push people to make choices and take a side when they shouldn't have to whatsoever. And that's what scares me about the whole thing.
Right. And I mean, we're seeing and this was one of the main focuses and one of the ideas where we both had the idea for this program and to discuss this, was some of the things that we're seeing fit right into the old playbook of the movement, you know, where we're seeing some of these narratives where people are talking about race war and civil war and the Boogaloo and all these different things where people are radicalizing, and it plays right into the movement or the extremist handbook, because you know, basically those narratives, those fears, those concerns that people had, that when they, you know, from the movement, was that, hey, someday the system is going to break down and there's going to be a revolution in this country. And the movement believes, you know, the far right, for our viewers, the far right believes they will be the saviors, and they're going to come and rescue all of America. And that's their narrative. Now, on the other side of the extreme, the far left, you know, they want also, you know, here's where the far right and the far left have some similarities. They both want the system to collapse, but for different reasons. And the leftist extremists we're seeing in a lot of cases, and I catch a lot of flack for saying anything about the left, but I feel like you have to be honest and precise when you're talking about these things, and you have to be consistent. So of course I'm going to point out where far right people are involved in some terrible things, and there was examples, like for example in Vegas already, where they caught some guys affiliated with the Boogaloo type of thinking that were going to plant bombs and things like that. So, I mean, I think that's really important to point those things out, but it's also, we'd be remiss if we were not pointing out that there's extremists involved in this stuff from both sides. And we're seeing a whole lot of that. Yeah,
definitely. It doesn't do anyone any justice to not point out that it comes from both sides. Any kind of extremism, no matter where it comes from, is just not a good thing, no matter what, no matter who it's coming from. And as far as the far right goes, I can tell everyone, as I'm sure you can, that the white power movement right now, they're seething at their teeth, because this is what they've always wanted. They've been waiting decades for this. It's, you know, it's like wonderful for them. they think it's great. So.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things I've probably spent, and I know you have too, but we've both spent an inordinate amount of time looking through news clips, videos, and everything about what's gone on in the past week. And the chatter I'm hearing from far right side is, hey, we don't even have to do anything. We just got to sit. They're sitting back, they're laughing as America burns, and they're waiting. And, we've seen the news media, different news media outlets, they seem to either push the narrative that it's all anarchists and Antifa on one side doing all this. And then there's other media that say that it's white supremacists doing all this. The truth is that it's somewhere in the middle. There's people from both extremes that are participating in this, but just from my experience, leading the NSM for 25 years and as a propagandist as well, these incidents and the things that are going on, a lot of it plays right into the movement playbook. This is why the right wing in mass, or the far right, is not really out there that much. I mean, yeah, you have some guys, you have some that were arrested, and you have some that were doing counterintelligence ops and different things like that. But for the most part, I see the far right sitting back, watching, rubbing their hands together. And just like you said, I mean, this is something that they predicted. This is something they were wishing for and hoping for all this time for many, many years. And now, we have where cities are being set on fire, and there's rioting and looting and things like that, and it's really, it fits their narrative. So I mean, they can play the victim and try to be the savior, and that's what they're looking for. And on the far left, it's more of they don't like the system as well, but it's for different reasons. So unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lot of middle of the road people becoming radicalized, and I think that's where our expertise comes in now more than ever, because this is something that's not really being discussed. Is with all what's going on, the public doesn't see it. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we do see it because we've been involved in extremism in the past, and we know the narratives and what could come. But my concern is, and I'm a little bit bouncing around all over the place here on the different subjects, but my concern is that if the far right feels like now is their time, that's when we're going to see some serious mass violence, mass shootings, mass bombings, the burning down of businesses and corporations and mom and pop stores. That's not the far right narrative. It never has been. That's not their thing. They're more bombing and shooting is more, something big, whereas the extreme far left, they don't like the corporations. I'm not quite sure why so many mom and pop businesses have been targeted in different parts of the country. I think it's just like a mass, a lot of criminals are taking advantage of a really sad and tragic event, and it's led up to a lot more tragedies.
Yeah. And if it doesn't stop soon, like you said, there's going to be something in this country, I fear, that will really scare everybody.
Do you want to, could you elaborate on that a little bit and give a few insights on what you think could possibly go wrong with this?
Well, growing up, I heard, my whole childhood growing up, exactly what's going on now. They couldn't, like I said before, they couldn't wait for this to happen. And I'm a little bit surprised, honestly, that they haven't done much of anything yet. But at the same time, I'm also not surprised, because like you said, they look at the bigger picture and bigger things. Right now, they're just sitting home laughing, watching the TV, watching everything that's going on, and knowing that they're not going to have to do anything to get people to want to join their groups. They're just going to come to them because people are going to see this, and Antifa coming in and looting and burning things down. The normal person, the normal citizen just sitting home watching all this unfold, they're going to start blaming everything on Black Lives Matter. And even when it's not, I believe it's mainly not them. I believe it's Antifa doing this because this is their MO. And the wrong people are going to be completely blamed. It's going to upset the white people, and they're going to look to join these groups. So people, they're just reacting to this very emotionally, for one thing. I don't think anyone's being logical about it whatsoever. And if they were able to see clearly and think step by step what's going to happen, I would hope that they would change what they were doing. But, none of us want racism, to grow, but I fear that that's what's going to happen with this. I see it. I see it on my own personal social media news feeds, people that I've never seen speak like that before. And so that's, that I really feel that's what's happening, unfortunately.
I think that's that's a good and important point too, is that a lot of these events are literally radicalizing people that would have never been radicalized before. And I think that's the narrative that I think most people are not really seeing. I think the media is missing it. You've got some in the media that are looking for white supremacist boogeymen. And there is white supremacists that are doing bad things involved in this stuff too. And, they're focusing on that, or they're focusing on, it's all Antifa, or it's all Black Lives Matter, or it's putting the blame on different people. But what I think the public is not seeing is some of right now, both extremes are getting victories in different ways. The far right, we already discussed, it's their victory because there's all this polarization, there's all this hate and racism, and people that normally wouldn't have been racist, that are just middle of the road people, are finding themselves, pushed towards one extreme or another. And we don't need any more extremism. Believe me, America, we came out of that world, and no one is going to like what is going to come of this is if the extreme left or the extreme right takes a hold of this country and uses these tragedies as their own narratives and taking this opportunity. No one's going to like it's going to be the end of America as we know it. And that's why, we're coming to you today, and we're trying to discuss these different things and to show a different angle of this from people that have been there, that know this world and know this struggle. And we're basically trying to forewarn you. We're involved in peace activism, human rights. We're against racism. And what we're seeing now presently is a lot of things that are whipping up racism on all sides. You're having different people talking about terrible things. I can say from a propaganda standpoint, like when I was in the movement, we would always try to find hot button issues. For example, in the NSM, the illegal immigration thing was a big deal. So we put people on the Arizona borders, we did patrols and things like that. And we started recruiting people that we would have never gotten before, because they would come to us and say, nobody's doing anything about illegal immigration, but you guys, you're down there on the borders. I want to join. I want to be part of that. So that's just one example. And I think that's an issue that bothered a lot of Americans, the illegal immigrants and lack of jobs and things like that. So it was a pretty hot button issue, and the group and a lot of the far right groups took advantage of that and used it as a narrative to recruit. Now what we're seeing is basically the biggest fantasy of the far right where all the races are going at it in some ways, or these terrible things are happening. And just as you explained a couple minutes ago there, Jen, this is stuff that you started hearing about when you were a child.
Yeah. I was about 2 years old the first time I saw my father in his Klan robe. So, yeah. And I do remember that. I clearly remember that even at 2 years old. And then I went to everyone that he was in the Elks Club and wore a hood. Kind of outed him a little bit, I guess. But because that's what he told me, so.
Oh, he told you that was the Elks uniform? The Klan robe was? Oh.
Yeah.
It wasn't, though.
No, obviously not. But God. Because I didn't know, so it was a couple years later, maybe I was around 7 and I went to school. I clearly remember telling someone on the bus, because I think they were talking about their father being in the Elks. I said, oh, so is my dad. Does your dad wear a big hood? White hood? Yeah. Thank God I don't think the kid knew what I was talking about.
Right. But those are the things that you think about after you're out, and you go back and you backtrack and go, wow, because we definitely, just like being in a cult, you see things differently, and it really, until you get out of that bubble or that echo chamber that is the movement, you really you're not reflecting on it when you're there. But after you're out, you think back to all these different things, and I find it interesting that you remember those things back to such an early age, and at the time you didn't really think nothing of it. It was a completely different narrative, but now when you see from the outside looking back in, it resonates, and you get it. It comes together, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you use the phrase echo chamber, and that's exactly what it really was. You hear the same phrases, right, over and over again. And it's maddening, actually. When I finally turned of age to leave and got away, it was just peaceful. It just seemed so much more peaceful.
Definitely. I mean, when you're in the movement, it's like you're at war with the world. It's your tribe versus the world, and that means versus other whites. That means versus the left. That means sometimes it's versus the other or the white nationalist groups. Everybody, you're fighting everybody.
Yeah, all of those groups fight each other. Mm-hmm. There's no unity whatsoever. They all, it's normal to have a big skinhead concert or rally and see fistfights, bottles breaking, blood flying. They fight each other.
Yep, all the time. If you had an especially at the concerts and stuff, if you had one where there was no fighting, that was one to remember. People say,
remember one.
There was no fights at that one, It was.
You mean nobody stabbed anyone else?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly how it was. So when we talk about some of the different narratives, and like I said about the illegal immigration thing, so insert the movement or the far right or any type of extremist movement, they like to insert themselves in the hot button issues and to twist it to their own narratives. And what we're seeing now, I mean, there's been a lot of, I think one thing that I think that is important for us to do is kind of expand upon some of the other tragedies that have been happening and where we're going with this, because I think we could explain it a little better, exactly why we're saying these things and why we are trying to warn the public that these are the narratives that are going to be used. So we want to effectively counter violent extremism in general. You have to know what you're up against. You have to know the psychology of it. You have to know, why do these people think the way they do, and how can we break that sort of thinking? of these individuals. So a few of the things that I have written down that we want to touch base on is, for example, David Dornan. He was a retired police officer. I believe he's about 77 years old in St. Louis. And I know we've both seen this. I believe have you seen the video, Jenn?
Yeah, I have. Awful.
Horrifying video. He's laying on the sidewalk. He had tried to stop some looters from looting a business in St. Louis there, and he was shot. Go ahead.
I believe it was a pawn shop he was trying to stop them from, breaking into.
Yeah.
And then just the guy who was recording it, who was standing there, just the pain in his voice was just awful and heartbreaking. That you could just hear it, how he was just pleading for peace, really, even if he didn't say those words. It was awful.
It's one of those videos, I think, that at least for me, and probably for you as well, there's certain things that you've seen in your life, in real life, and also in videos of real life things that kind of stay etched or stuck in your mind. Do you ever have that?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's one of those videos. That's one of those, and same with what happened with George Floyd. It's another one of those things that stays stuck in your mind. And I want to talk about that a little bit and say, from the movement's perspective, from the far right's perspective, one of the things that we did, I specifically did as a recruiter in the National Socialist Movement, was we would show people show the group some of the most horrific videos that we could find, and a usual go-to in more recent times, especially, or in the past 10 years, or maybe even longer than that, is a lot of the racial violence that went on in South Africa. And there's a video, and I hope nobody watching this has seen it, or not too many of you seen it, because it's probably one of the most horrific ones that's stuck and etched in my mind. But it was something that we used as propagandists in the movement. It showed a group of blacks taking this white farmer in the street, and it was in the middle of the day in busy traffic, and they were basically stripping this man naked and beating him, jumping on his head, throwing chunks of concrete at his privates and private parts and his face and his head, and it was probably one of the most vicious, vile, disgusting videos I've ever seen in my life. And we sent that around in the movement and showed people and say, look, what's happening in South Africa, this is what's going to happen in the United States if the movement doesn't come to power and we don't, save our race and people. So this was the narrative. And nobody that would watch that video would come away with it and go, oh, that was nothing. I mean, that's one of those gross, horrific, terrible videos that stays stuck in your mind, much like watching David Dornan take his last breaths on film, and much like watching the police officer, squeeze the life out of George Floyd. These are images that stay stuck in people's minds. So what the movement is doing, they will show their people these videos to radicalize their people. And watching a man die on the sidewalk over looters, over a TV set, like the guy in the video keeps saying, I mean, that's something that sticks in people's mind. And the movement will twist that. The far right will twist that and say, look, this is what's going to happen to anyone in America that's defending their businesses. I know the narrative because that's, we were there, they will twist it to their own narrative. And like the people that are doing the criminal activities, that are doing the burning, that are doing the looting, the crime, we're using this as an opportunity to cause chaos and violence. It's fitting right into the extremist narratives.
Definitely to divide.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the whole concept of it, right?
People that have the character to do things like that, to loot, to burn buildings down, innocent people's businesses and things like that, they do not have it in them to even want peace. Obviously, they don't want peace, or they wouldn't do things like that. And I wish other people would realize that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. I'm looking at how people, the general public is responding to some of these things, and in some areas, I'm seeing across the boards people from both sides, from the Democrats, the Republicans, and the mainstream parties condemning the violence and condemning that stuff. But in other cases, and sometimes even Hollywood stars and politicians, they're justifying it. They're saying that it's okay to be, the people are mad. That's why they're doing that. Okay, well, people have a reason to be mad, but that doesn't mean you start burning down cities and
Exactly.
What does that solve? It plays into the extremist narrative, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And as far as what you just touched on, Hollywood, everything that I've read lately, the past few days, is you're right. They're saying people are mad, and they are donating money to bail these people out of jail. It's mind-blowing.
And we want America to heal. We wouldn't be speaking out against extremism publicly like we are. It takes, you put yourself at great risk by doing so, as you know. And we'll discuss more about your story in the future and upcoming episodes. And I mean, even what I know about your story, it just absolutely blows me away, that you've had the strength and the resilience to come out of that and drawn so much knowledge and strength and perseverance from that I think it's going to be really inspiring for people to hear. And that's why I think it's important that people listen to some of the things that we're trying to say. We're not doing this because we have nothing better to do. We're doing this because we care, because we want America to heal, and we're involved in peace building activities. And what we're seeing, our fellow Americans, from even people that were not radical before, becoming more and more radical to one extreme or another. And this is the narrative, and it is the wish of these extremist groups, is to get Americans at each other's throats. And we're seeing, some of the comments, I'm glad I didn't write them down, because it's probably best not to even say, but some of the comments just from regular mainstream people. I've seen, "I hope you die," just vicious, horrible things that they're saying to other Americans, or they're showing, here's one that I would like to talk about too. There was a police officer that resigned from the police department because he didn't want to be part of that system anymore, and he said he was against it, and he couldn't be a cop anymore, and he left. And the first comments that came underneath this guy's posts were, "F you, cop, I hope you die, once a cop, always a cop." I've experienced some of that since I've left the movement, where if I say things, especially if I point out that there's violence on both sides, there's people that'll say, "You're a Nazi, I hope you die." Yep. Vicious, terrible stuff. And it's not just the far right making threats. It's both extremes.
Absolutely. Both sides. Social media has become a complete cesspool of bullying and hatred and negativity, and it's awful. It's awful. I'm just like, everyone has completely lost their minds. Completely.
Yeah, it's almost like a lot of the public is having a hard time with adulting, because we're seeing this talk about defund the police departments. And that was another thing on my list too that I wanted to touch on, was like the mayor of Minneapolis, and this just came out today or yesterday. Jacob Frey is his name. He's a Democrat, and he's left leaning. And he's been very vocal in support of George Floyd and convicting the officers. He's been somebody that's, I don't necessarily agree with all of his decisions, like letting the police departments burn and things like that. I think it was signaling. I think if you say, okay, well, it's okay to burn down a police department. I mean, we've never seen anything like that in our lifetimes, but they got at least 2 of them burned down in Minneapolis because it was like a go-ahead to do that. And then a whole lot of the city burned as well, unfortunately. But that wasn't really going to be the point. But my point is, and this is relevant, but that Mr. Fry was at a rally the other day, and they asked him if he was willing to defund and end the Minneapolis Police Department. And, he was talking about how he's in solidarity with the protesters and all this sort of thing. And they kept asking him, they said, no, we want a yes or a no answer. Will you, end the police department? And he said no. And they literally booed him out of that event. Like, you can see.
I saw that video. Yeah. Incredible
polarization as far, here's one of the strongest voices, I thought, of the protest movement. And they wanted to get rid of the police, and he didn't agree with that, and he was basically run out of this protest. I think
what do they think is going to happen without a police department?
Tell us, what do you think explain it.
All hell will break loose. I mean, to put it simply, that just blows my mind that people have lost all logic. It's going to be mad chaos. It would be like Purge.
Yeah. Yes.
It would be like a movie Purge, which, some already look like Purge. But that's just mind blowing. I mean, I am all for, standing up against police brutality. It's happened to me. So I know it happens. Clearly, I know many people it's happened to, unfortunately. But we still need law and order in this country.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, yes, the police brutality is out of control, and I think that there's a lot of things that need to be done to fix that. And I think what a lot of people are forgetting is that, yes, there's bad people in the police departments. What happened to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many other people throughout history even have been victimized by bad cops. But that does not mean that everybody in the police departments are bad. I mean, I think that fits an extremist narrative right there, is the whole ACAB, and I know you wanted to talk about that too, but that fits that narrative as well. We have to remember, these are human beings. These are people that have families at home. They're going to work, and I can already hear the other side of the extreme going, how come he's apologizing or making room for the police when they've brutalized all these people? The people that they've brutalized and the people that have lost their lives, like George Floyd and so many countless others, had families and things like that too. So I'm definitely not picking sides in any of this. Both of us, we're against extremism, and we're trying to find this middle of the road happy place, or this positivity in the center where most Americans really are, where they want their safety and security and all that. But getting rid of the police departments, as wonderful as that sounds on paper, there's a lot of other things that sound wonderful on paper too, that don't work in reality. And I think even the best intentioned people, if you have no police and you have no law and order, the most violent and the most vicious and the most psychotic of killers and just anarchists and people that want to destroy, and not all anarchists are violent. I feel like I need to explain some of these things as we go, because people pick apart everything that you say and will say, look, he said all anarchists want to burn and destroy, and that's not true either. But I'm saying the worst elements of the extremes will use these opportunities to destroy America, because that's what they want.
It would be like the Wild West, worse than the Wild West, really. I mean, without the police, and what about all the children that are kidnapped, the abused children, you know? People don't think about these things. They just let their emotions take over, and they just start screaming things that they hear the next person screaming. That's what I really think it is. A lot of people right now are just parroting each other. Kind of like we did in the movement. Same thing.
Absolutely. It's like a herd mentality where it's like
Exactly.
a guy's laying in the street, he's knocked unconscious or completely out of it, and people go up and start kicking his teeth out or jumping on his head. And I know you have too, but we've seen some of those videos, just vicious stuff. Like, people are, and a lot of times I think the public doesn't want to hear it from people, that have been in the movement, hear these things, because they say, oh, well, you're no better. You used to do those things too. But we talk about change, and we talk about the past. And in the past, yes, I was not a good person. I wanted there to be a race war. I wanted there to be a civil war. I wanted the country to break down. And whether it's through age, wisdom, the de-radicalization process, not approving of racism and hate and all these sort of things, that once you have a grasp on that and you're out of that echo chamber or out of that cult-like bubble, you see these things. And I think, now it's almost like our inherent duty to like struggle against that and fight against that. And that's why, we're speaking out to, the public today and in the past and in the future as well.
Yeah, I think it's important. It's very important to speak out. But when I speak out, I want to speak out with the truth. I don't want to just, I refuse to be what I was just saying, just a parrot repeating things that, other people want me to say.
No, I think that's really important, and I'm glad you said that, because I think that's what we're seeing a lot of. Like, you have a lot of really good intentioned people that are trying to make sense of everything and trying to break down and form their own narratives and their own opinions. And in a lot of cases, they're parroting things, or they're falling into that herd mentality where normally, you have, say, one individual here that's smashing a window of a Nike shoes or something, and another guy standing next to him that probably would have never done that in his life. And then he sees 5 people rush into the Nike store to grab a pair of shoes. They go, I'm going to do that too. And then all of a sudden, you've got somebody that normally wouldn't have done that is following that herd mentality. And a lot of people I feel like are losing their humanity in this process. They're not thinking about, hey, that man that I just shot for a television set that's dying and taking his last breaths here was somebody's grandfather, was somebody's father, somebody's brother, mother, sister. They're not thinking of these things. And I know all the years that I spent in the movement, as I was getting out, when it's the last few years that I was in the movement, I started talking about how white people were being dehumanized, and how specifically people in the movement were being dehumanized. Like, that was a big talking point for me the last couple of years. It wasn't in a lot of interviews because people didn't want to hear it and they didn't want to cover it. And I was like, man, why are people not covering this? The movement's being dehumanized. And it's so hypocritical. It's like, it wasn't until I got out that I was like, man, nobody called me out on this. Nobody said, here's the Nazi party leader talking about dehumanization. How hypocritical. Nobody did that. But I said it to myself after the de-radicalization process, or during that process. I was like, man, nobody called you out on that, Jeff. Like, how could you talk about dehumanization when you spent a lifetime dehumanizing others? And the movement did the same thing. So I think it's an interesting psychological point, though, for the people in the movement. They started realizing or started seeing or feeling that they were being dehumanized or treated less than. And I think a lot of the narrative that's out there with the public, even other formers, a lot of them will tell people that the movement was all based on hate, and everything about them and why they were involved was about hate. I've met those types of people in the movement that are just completely motivated by they hate Black people or they hate Jewish people, and it is all about hate for them. But those are the hate, I feel like, is developed in there. It's not something that we're born with. We're not born racists or hate mongers or anything like that. I think it's developed, and I think and I believe that a lot of people, I know I thought this way, and a lot of other people, most of the people that I knew in the movement, felt like the white race was under attack and they were on the defensive. And the common narrative to the public is that the movement is on the offensive and they're out to hurt and oppress everybody. But in the minds of the people that are in the movement, they think they're defending their people, they're doing something brave and noble and something good. If your only motivation is, I hate everybody and I just want to be involved in this because I don't like everybody, you're going to burn out. You're not going to stay in there, especially for any length of time. It's just not, it doesn't make any sense. But when you truly believe in something and you see that as a righteous cause, you're defending your people, your blood, all that sort of thing. That's why they say even with religious extremists, if they believe that they have God on their side, and it's the same way with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Islamic extremists, Christian identity on the white nationalist side, or it can be tailored to fit any religion. But if you feel like you're doing something noble and something good, you have more motivation to do that rather than something negative like just hating people. So I think that's another important thing that people need to realize in breaking down the narratives, taking away the narratives. If we want to get people out of whatever form of extremism they're involved in, whether it's religious, whether it's white nationalist, whether it's far left, we have to listen, we have to engage in dialogue, and we have to treat these people like human beings. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to do and envision, but I know in my own de-radicalization process, it was some of the kindness of even people from the left and people of other races and other religions that helped me to see a lot of the things that I was missing. So I think it's really important that we have dialogue with the so-called other, with other people, even if we disagree with them, instead of throwing things or fighting or getting violent or screaming and name calling. That if we just had discussions and dialogue, I think it would make a lot of difference. What do you think?
Absolutely. You just talking about this brought me back to a memory from one of the times I was on Jerry Springer's show, and Jerry Springer sat there, and he wasn't kind to me. He just wasn't, even though I was a kid. And Jerry Springer stood there and told me that I was ruined. And I said, I'm ruined? And he says, yes, you're ruined. And then kind of just kept talking about something else then. And this is all, it's all on video. That didn't make me want to love him. That didn't make me want to love him or anyone he had anything to do with. There's another episode, I don't believe it was the same episode. There's another episode I did where they brought in Niger Innes, and he sat there, and there was a dialogue between my father August and him and me. I never forgot that man. He was kind. He said, I don't remember verbatim exactly what he said, but he had hope that I would grow up and not be full of hate and maybe even go to college and do something with my life. Those are the things I remember. Those are the things that I'll forever appreciate. I reached out to him. I found him on social media last year, and it was kind of, I felt like I had to tell him how much that meant to me all these years later. So those are the things That'll help people get out of the extremist groups. Because if you're going to be hateful towards them, hate breeds hate. Nothing else is going to come of that.
That's an incredible story, and you're absolutely correct. And even in my own process, meeting filmmaker Dia Khan, who did the film White Right, Meeting the Enemy. Her and I are friends to this day. She was, and she's on the left, and her and I should not be friends. I mean, we made friends when I was still in the movement, and we were like, we should not be getting along. We should not be friends, but because we were so different. But she's an absolutely incredible human being, and her thing is talking and listening and hearing what people have to say. And she's so compassionate and kind that I don't think anybody can't see it. Daryl Davis is another one, another good friend of mine. And he's a famous musician. He used to play with Chuck Berry and a lot of other famous musicians, and he's famous on his own. He's an incredible musician, an incredible person. And Daryl's hobby is he de-radicalizes people in the movement, and specifically the Klan. And just on his own, Daryl's de-radicalized like over 200 Klansmen.
That's
using
awesome.
these same tactics, like
awesome.
Talking, like dialogue, just like the man you mentioned, and in your life. So I mean, these are similarities that we both have that helped us, that resonated with us, in those difficult times. Because and I've talked about this before too, and I think it's important. A lot of people believe the whole mantra of punch a Nazi in the face, or the dehumanization of people in the movement is real. I mean, that is correct. But the hypocrisy, what I was talking about was the movement people do that to other races. So it's sort of like evens itself out. Like, you've dehumanized, now you're getting it. It's sort of like what you had said about hate begets hate. If you treat somebody no one has ever left a movement by getting punched in the face.
Right. That's going to make them stay in the movement.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just it. So I think when people talk about wanting others to come out and walk away and things like that, the polarization or the not accepting of that, like the police officer that said, he was leaving his job, and people were like, screw you, cop, you need to die because you were a police officer. And we, as former white nationalists, get that too sometimes. There's some people out there that will never accept that change is real, or believe in it, or support it, or they think they believe that because of our past that we must grovel and make, I'm trying to think of the right words, the right way to put this, but really that we owe society a great debt and things of that nature. And I do believe that we do to an extent. I'm ashamed of my past and the things that I participated in and all that, but I'm trying to use my skill set and my knowledge and the leadership skills and the things that I acquired there and what I was good at for good things now, to do something positive and to do something good. So I think, and not to even make it personal, because that's not what it's about. But when I see all these other people that are, I mean, we're working with different people all the time that are kind of on the fence. A lot have left, some are still involved, and some are on the fence about leaving. And I feel like there's things that will radicalize those individuals to stay, and there's ways that they can, come out of there and actually leave the movement. Very few people that have left extremism speak out about it like we do. We are definitely in the minority in that sense, because it's dangerous, it's difficult, and admitting you were wrong sucks, especially as I could say as a man, getting up in front of crowds of people and talking about I was wrong. It's really difficult. Jenn, thank you so much for being on the program, Beyond Barriers. I look forward to having many more conversations with you. I think there's so many more subjects that we need to tackle going forward. You have an incredible wealth of information, and your story is something that I really think the public needs to hear. And we're going to expand upon that in future episodes. But thank you so much for joining the program this evening. It was an honor to have you here. Do you have anything else you'd like to say in closing?
Say thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. And I am very grateful for what you've been doing too. I know that for me, just being around it for so long, I know how hard it must have been for you to get away and then step onto that stage. Not just the first time, but every time. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.